Okay, so very good afternoon to everyone. Today we will be learning about the H2 antagonist and proton pump inhibitors. Now previously we have studied in details about what is histamine, what are the different type of receptors of histamine, and in that regard we have studied that H1 is important for allergy and H2 is important for gastric acid secretion. And as a result, for H1, what we generally do, or what are the different type of drugs, and what are the antagonism which is preferred for H1, we have studied these things in details. And now on, from this on this day, on this lecture, we will study about the H2 antagonists and PPI, and that is proton pump inhibitors. So let me quickly start this one. First is that let's talk about the H2 antagonist, because remember that this is the same ligand which is being used here, and that is histamine. And the major change, whatever will be there, will be on the structure of the protein, and for that reason also the structure of overall the antagonist will change as well. However, there will be obviously some structural similarity with the histamine itself, because we all know that if we want to design an antagonist, it has to have the similar kind of a structure when we are talking about having antagonist of any particular protein. So in this case, there are a few things that we must remember, is that histamine is basically secreted from the enterochromaffin like cell. So this is actually you should remember one thing very clearly, that this is the full name of it, the enterochromaffin like cell. This is actually the full name of this this cell, and it is not like it is being something being compared. So this is something that you must remember as a first topic. So the next point here that we should discuss about H2 antagonist is that they are basically a competitive inhibitor in nature. And by this word competitive inhibitor, I think you have studied this one already in your pharmacology, that competitive inhibitor actually means that it will have somewhat the same structural similarity with histamine, which is the natural ligand of these type of protein, but the affinity will be different. That is, if we say that histamine, if we think about histamine first, just give me one moment, and let me set this up. Okay, yeah. So if we think about, say, a histamine, if we remember this, if you remember the structure here. So if you think about the histamine, and we have, say, the interaction with the H2 receptor, the reception or the binding ability of this substance, this histamine with H2 receptor, will be much lesser compared to the antagonist. Now remember that antagonist must have a better binding activity with the receptor. If it does not happen in this way, what will happen is that the antagonism will not take place. The histamine here will bind with the H2 receptor, and the antagonist will not even come to play. So antagonist must have better quality of binding ability with this type of H2 receptor, so that it can have a good quality antagonism property. So this is basically something which is very common for any kind of competitive inhibitor, and which we will learn in our future classes as well. Now it is interesting that this is first developed by the company called Smith, Klein and French. Now it is GSK. I think a lot of you know that what is the meaning, what is the full form of GSK. It is now basically Smith and Klein. This name French has been changed, and it has combined with one of the major multinational company called Glaxo, which is I think a British company. and they have now formed GSK. Now, why I have included this information, because this is one of the earliest example. This cimetidine is cimetidine or ranitidine, whatever you say. It is these type of drugs are some of the first proper example that computational or mathematical chemistry can play a very good importance in case of your drug discovery. The concept of QSAR, or quantitative structure activity relationship, it was the first time which was used in this kind of drugs. Obviously, I will not say this is the first time it has been ever used, but one drug to come from that calculation bench to an upscale and now a very popular drug which is sold worldwide, and one of the best sold drug of GSK by volume. And it was a brainchild, or a theoretical child of mathematical chemistry. So mathematical chemistry does play a very vital role, and you will learn about mathematical chemistry, or QSAR in this case, that is quantitative structure activity relationship, in your upcoming semester. It is mostly used for treating dyspepsia. You know what is dyspepsia? It is another of technical term, or not a technical term, but I would use this word clinical term for hyperchlorhydria. That means whenever a person is having excessive amount of gastric acid secretion, that person will feel bad or feel diseased. It will feel that person will feel ill, and that is in those conditions generally H2 antagonists are given. But remember, not for hyperchlorhydria. That means acute hyperchlorhydria. That means if a person has already got this condition of hyperchlorhydria for due to some reason, maybe for excessive eating or something, if that person is already facing the feeling of heartburn or stomach ache due to excessive acid secretion, maybe that person is getting some acid reflux, the best thing here to have is basically an inorganic type of drug, and that is aluminum hydroxide gel. And aluminum hydroxide gel can never replace the ability of or their acid neutralizing capability, and the concept of H2 antagonist are entirely different. H2 antagonist will prevent the acid from secretion, but if there is already some amount of acid which is present in the in your stomach, that cannot be neutralized by neither H2 antagonist nor proton pump inhibitor. For such condition, the best type of drug is, I think you have already previously studied about them, is either some kind of antacid, systemic or non-systemic antacid like sodium bicarbonate, or maybe like magnesium hydroxide, or say aluminum hydroxide, which comes as a form of either a colloidal solution or maybe a dry gel like tablet formation. A very common drugs are now marketed in the name of, say, Gelusil and so on. So therefore, remember, if a person is suddenly feeling bad or having this kind of hyperacidity for a shorter time, it's best to treat that person with aluminum or magnesium hydroxide gel. Now let's talk about some of the major drugs here that what we have. Some of the major drugs in this case we will study about cimetidine. It is one of the major important drug, and in this semester we are going to study about cimetidine in a very detail. Remember, in this case this is basically an imidazole based drug. The major moiety here, you can understand, it is an imidazole moiety. Imidazole, you know, it is a 5-membered ring with 2 different nitrogen present. So this is an imidazole derivative. Obviously, some other kind of changes will be in case of furan, but if you see the major substance here for furan, and that is, if I mean by the major substance, I mean major moiety, and the major moiety for ranitidine in this case is the furan. Remember that when we studied about the basic structure of antihistamines, we learned that some aromatic groups will be important for every single structure. So see, in this case also, though it is H2 antihistamine, you can see that this aromatic ring structure, where it is basically furan, is playing a very vital role. Almost similarly, in case of famotidine also you will see this almost similar kind of a structure, but the major change will be first in this aromatic ring, which is now a thiazole, unlike cimetidine, which has imidazole, and ranitidine, which has furan. Not only that, there are some other changes. You can see cimetidine does not have major replacement at this position, that is the adjacent carbon of the main chain. It has replacement in entirely different direction. Also, it is interesting to see that cimetidine does not have any kind of further amide or amine like structures, which as a part of the substitution on the aromatic ring, but in case of ranitidine and famotidine you will find these kind of similarities here. Next up, what we have is the SAR of cimetidine. Here we are using cimetidine as a structural modification, because cimetidine also was a brainchild of QSAR, and from QSAR we have learned that what are the different type of modification could have been done on ranitidine to making or giving that drug a better activity. Now, if we go with the SAR, the individual SAR of this particular drug, and that is cimetidine, the first thing that we should start with is that cimetidine has basically the same kind of structure like histamine. Now, this thing is very important here, important to understand here, because see, any kind of competitive inhibitor that we are talking about, any competitive inhibitor must have structural similarity with the initial ligand or the natural ligand of that particular drug. Now, if there is no such similarity of, or the resemblance, or the structural resemblance, then it will be very difficult to have that kind of antagonistic activity. Now, back there, if you remember, we had discussed about the the basic structure of any kind of antihistamines. In that study, we have learned that a few things are important for any kind of antihistamine to have its effectiveness. The first and foremost condition of the structure was that it must have some kind of say a linker part, CH2N. There will be some kind of NH2 group which is present. There will be another molecule, another atom like an X, and with that X there will be AR1 and AR2 which will be added. Now, if you look into that structure and if you see the structure of cimetidine here, there are quite a lot of similarity. See, we see here that the CH2 group is present. Apart from that, this NH2 group, though not exactly as NH2 or primary amine, we have it as a secondary amine group here. We have this X group replaced with one sulfur group here, and you can see that the one aromatic group is also present in this case, and therefore we can say in short that this similarity is quite being justified as the main structural feature of any antihistamine. So, be it H1 or be it H2, these kind of structural similarities will always be there. Next up, what we have is that the imidazole ring, as I have already discussed with you, that the presence of this aromatic group is extremely important, and therefore we can say that this imidazole ring here, this 5-member double nitrogen ring, it is important for the affinity of the H2 receptor site. Previously also when we studied about the H1 receptor, in that case also we have learned that aromatic ring, the presence of the aromatic ring is ubiquitous and it will be found, and therefore in short we can say that in presence of the aromatic ring is important for the affinity with any kind of histamine, and therefore if we go with any structure of antihistamine, in every single case we will see the presence of this aromatic ring, and obviously this should be done because histamine itself contains one aromatic ring. The next up what we have is the substitution at the C4 site helps in H2 selectivity of the drug. Now which one is the C4 site? Here the C4, the carbon 4 site, is mainly this carbon which we are talking about. Now considering this as this is considered from this nitrogen, it is present that the C4 here, it is important for the H2 selectivity of that drug. The sulfur atom which is there, it is more potent when we are comparing it with nitrogen or sulfur. Nitrogen, or my bad, this is not sulfur which I was thinking about, sulfur, nitrogen or oxygen. As we know that these kind of linker moiety can be nitrogen, it can be carbon, it can be oxygen, and so on. So in this case we see that in case of cimetidine, that nitrogen and oxygen will have some better activity. Now if we see that the N-cyanoamino group which is present in this case, it will have a better potency if we replace with a nitromethane group. Nitromethane, you can understand that it will be basically NO then CH3 group, and nitromethane group can also be extremely important in this case. Basically not exactly like this, it should be CH2, it will be NO2 and so on. So this kind of nitromethane group can also be there, and it can replace the N-cyanoamine group. Next on what we have that guanidines with electron withdrawing group substitution have a decreased basicity than any kind of normal guanidine. Now you can see that this is basically mimicking the structure of guanines, and basically which is a nucleic acid base, and in this case if there is some kind of substitution in such cases, then it will have decreased basicity than guanidine, and you know, if there is decreased basicity, the activity will also increase along with it. So this is something extremely important, and you should remember this. And finally, if we think that if we replace that imidazole ring with any other type of aromatic rings, it will give other useful products. That means the other substances which we have seen in the previous slide, such as famotidine or ranitidine, they have different kind of efficacy and activity, and also the duration of activity, and that can be changed by the replacement of this aromatic ring. So this aromatic ring, though it plays a very important role, other type of aromatic ring can also play vital function. Now let's talk about the synthesis of cimetidine. If we talk about the synthesis, it will start with 2-chloroacetoacetic acid ether. So obviously you can say that this is the chlorine and this is the ether formation. So this is the 2-chloroacetoacetic acid ether, and this will be reacted with formamide, and after this reaction there will be a small cyclization reaction at this place. Upon this cyclization reaction, the product will be 4-carmethoxy 5-methyl imidazole. So this is the imidazole ring which is being formed at first. Now sodium and ammonia will create a further process, and in this case basically what is happening is that this acidic group, this part is basically getting, this ether group is being hydrolyzed, and in this case what we are seeing is that we are getting 5-methyl 1H imidazole 4-yl methanol. So basically it is basically you can start it with the methanol CH2OH, like CH2OH, and which is being replaced. In this case we have this methanol, and at the same time we are having this further methyl group which is present in this case. Next what we have, we react this further with 2-mercaptoethylamine, and this mercaptoethylamine after reaction will give us 2-5-methyl 1H imidazole 4-yl methyl thioethylamine. So this is let me break down the structure. Obviously 5-methyl imidazole part is here, 4-yl means it is having this structure getting here, and then methyl thio, that means this is the methyl thio portion, and ethanolamine means this portion is the ethanolamine. So this is actually what is happening here. The name, again I repeat myself, it is 2 methyl 5 methyl 5 methyl 1 H imidazolyl 1 H imidazolyl, because there is one H here, 4 yl methyl thio, this is the methyl thio part, then ethanamine, and that is this ethanamine part. Let me just remove the ink because I have told you it is quite a few times and it has been many scribbles have been there. So next up what we have is something called the dimethyl cyanocarbon imidothioate, because this is one part which is happening here. This is the cyanocarbon part, this is the dimethyl part, and this portion is something which we call the imidothioate. And in dithioate, in this case the reaction will basically provide us with the further part where we need this cyano group in this case, and that is why remember, this is the product which we are getting. This is basically called Z1. Now Z, you know that there is a configuration called E configuration and Z configuration. E and Z, I think you know, E is basically cis and Z is basically trans. I think you have already studied this in your organic chemistry previously, and basically trans and cis are generally called in this term. So Z here, Z actually means that this is the transformation which we are looking for. This is trans 1 to 5 methyl. So this is the 5 methyl, again this we are talking about this part. So 5 methyl 1 H imidazole 4 yl methyl thioethyl. So up to this part we have completed methyl thioethyl. Then 3 cyano 2 methyl isothiourea. So this is the isothiourea part. Please remember, this is the isothiourea part, and this is the 3 cyano part. So start with this one, methyl isothiourea. This is the methyl isothiourea. The first replacement that is happening is on the 3 cyano group. So write 3 cyano before that, and then you can go with the rest of the molecule, which is 2 5 methyl 1 H imidazole 4 yl methyl thioethyl part. Next on this is will be reacted with methylamine, and after reaction with methylamine, this sulfur group will be simply replaced with this methylamine, and finally we will be getting cimetidine. Now though we have used computer, please remember that QSAR or computational drug discovery basically gives us the idea of the structure, but after that the synthesis process is also extremely important, and being a medicinal chemist we must know both the part, that is the synthesis part, and at the same time the part where we need to design a particular molecule for a specific work. So this is one major synthesis that you must remember, and nearly all the other synthesis of this group either is done in the similar way, or maybe in some cases maybe in a more lucid way as well. However, that is beyond the scope of our discussion at this lecture. Now let's talk about the proton pump inhibitor. Now H2 and proton pump inhibitor, they work hand in hand, as I have already told you that H1 is basically one previous part, or an initial part which generally receive the signals of histamine from the enterochromaffin like cell, and it asks the parietal cell to secrete the hydrochloric acid, in this case the H plus, and that process of hydrochloric acid synthesis, or especially if you are talking about the hydrogen plus secretion, which is basically commonly known as the proton, which is basically without any kind of one simple hydrogen without an electron. That is why we call it proton, and that is why in this case that is called proton pump. However, it has a formal name as well, and that formal name is basically H plus K plus ATPase enzyme. Just do not write simply as ATPase enzyme, because there are different type of ATPase enzyme, which is especially known as the H plus K plus ATPase enzyme, and this enzyme is basically basically inhibited by proton pump inhibitor. You need to remember a few things, that proton pump inhibitors are not directly related to histamine, but as H2 antagonist and proton pump inhibitors, they both have similar kind of action. We are using these two drugs as together, and therefore on the next slide, when you will see some major structure of the proton pump inhibitors, you will see that the structure is entirely different from H2 antagonist. Now, it has basically a better H2 inhibitory activity, not inhibitory activity, but it has better efficacy in prevention of gastric acid secretion. Basically, 99% of the gastric acid can be suppressed by using these kind of enzyme suppressor, that is proton pump inhibitor. So nowadays, proton pump inhibitors are used a lot more than H2 inhibitors. For their efficacy, and also due to their ease of use. Basically, H2 inhibitors you will have to take at least thrice, once before every meal. So if a person is suffering from chronic ulcer, that is very difficult for them to consume. You can understand this thing, that if a person has a chronic disease, that person might even forget at times. But if a person forgets to take the medicine, the disease cannot be cured in a proper timeline. Proton pump inhibitor, as I told you, that it has a better efficacy. It is also once in a day long acting type of a drug, and that is why these type of drugs can be given once in a day, and it is much easier for a patient to take it. It's very ironical. One thing is that these kind of drugs are basically degrades to gastric pH. It is preventing gastric pH, and it is also getting degraded to gastric pH. This is very interesting, and that is why it has to be made enteric coated, and it will go into your small intestine, and in the small intestine it will be digested and absorbed also in that part. If we see the chemistry of these drugs, we can say that they are mostly benzimidazole derivatives. Some of the newer drugs we are getting, they are also imidazopyridine derivative as well. Now let's see some of the major drugs in this case. I think a lot of you people know the name of the few drugs, but in this case you need to study about the structures as well. The first drug of this class is omeprazole. If you look into the omeprazole structure, as we said, that benzimidazole part, this one will be important in this case. However, different type of substitutions are there. Now, after omeprazole, we also have pantoprazole, where basically we are not just keeping the simple methyl group as this methoxy group. However, that methoxy group is also further substituted as fluoromethyl group. So it is fluoromethyl, is fluoromethoxy group, difluoromethoxy group in case of pantoprazole. So remember, there are only a very few drugs in which is marketed which has fluorine derivative. So pantoprazole, and in this case the later one, the lansoprazole, are some of those drugs which contains fluorine atom. Now, in case of rabiprazole, you can see that in case of rabiprazole, the replacement is mostly done on the other part, not on this exactly on the benzimidazole part, and so the same thing is true for lansoprazole as well. In case of lansoprazole, there is also, you can see that one trimethyl group has been attached with this oxygen group, or we can say it's a trifluoro ethyl ethoxy group which has been attached with this aromatic ring. So this is basically the structure of lansoprazole. So mostly this is something that we need to study about the proton pump inhibitors. As we can summarize the whole thing into few words, is that first, H2 type of drugs and H2 antagonist and proton pump inhibitors, they are both used to prevent the excessive gastric acid secretion or hydrochloric acid secretion inside our stomach. There are many different conditions such as GERD, gastric ulcer, and in such cases a person might take omeprazole, pantoprazole, rabiprazole, or lansoprazole, these kind of proton pump inhibitors, or maybe to some extent classical drugs like H2 inhibitors. all these drugs, H2 inhibitors, though they directly work on the histaminic receptor, histamine receptor, but proton pump inhibitors have no effect on H2 receptors. Now, for that reason, for that actual reason, what we generally see is that these type of drugs are prescribed nowadays, being extremely useful for these kind of conditions. However, H2 antagonists still have their use if a person is just suffering from GERD, and it is very cheap because these drugs are almost 50 years old, and at times they are used in combination with proton pump inhibitors. So if you want to have further reading, you can follow Foy's Medicinal Chemistry or Medicinal Chemistry by Algarsami, two of the very good book. Foy's Medicinal Chemistry you can follow for a different type of SAR and basic mechanism of action, and all these type of knowledge. For Medicinal Chemistry by Algarsami, I would suggest you for any kind of synthesis related study, because this book has a lot of synthesis which is together. So thank you everyone for seeing today's class. If you have any questions, you can put it forward. So thank you and have a great day.